The Texas Christian Horned Toads, 51. The Michigan Wolverines, 45. The amount of words that want to come out of my mouth, 0. The amount of headaches that I have, 1. Unbelievable. 51, 45, and I do have a lot of thoughts on this game as I'm recording at the halftime of the Peach Bowl, which, hey, this might be the first year in which both underdogs in the semifinals win. That might have happened in 2017 if my memory serves me correctly, but TCU was a big underdog. Ohio State was a sizable underdog until the spread moved today, before the game began a few hours ago. And here we are. TCU, capitalizing off of mistakes, being somewhat uncharacteristic to their nature. Their D-line came alive in a way that I've never seen it come alive. Their mental, physical toughness was phenomenal. There's so much to say, so few words to describe it coming from a Wolverine fan, and yet there is so much I can say to describe it. There's ranting, there's analysis, there's the reaction, there's so many parts of this. This Michigan team was 1 touchdown and an extra point away from winning it all. Just going to throw that out there. No, we will never know if they would beat Georgia or Ohio State. But judging on how good this offense is when it clicks, judging from how we as fans know what Michigan's defense can do to Ohio State's offense, and knowing that Georgia's offense is the most basic, least complex, and least explosive offense in the college football playoff, Michigan would do a pretty darn good job and put up a good fight at minimum against Georgia or Ohio State. And they probably could have beaten both of them, but they fell short. They did not play their A game in the college football playoff semifinal, and I didn't think they needed to play their A game, but they didn't even play their B game. Some would argue they didn't even play their C game. What I witnessed on the field, and I say that not that I attended, but from the TV screen, what I witnessed on my Samsung TV was unholy style of football. Pick 6. Michigan doesn't throw interceptions. They throw sketchy passes, but they're rarely picked off. Michigan doesn't fumble at the goal line. Michigan doesn't have multiple false starts in a game. Michigan doesn't run the Philly special on 4th and goal when you have a run game. Those are 4 things that I named off the bat that were uncharacteristic. Completely uncharacteristic. And these are things that are to, by the way, TCU's credit. Because a lot of these things happened in reaction to TCU taking a double-digit lead. Michigan panicked. The offensive line it just wasn't good. It wasn't. It played subpar the entire game. It seems like Michigan has invented something new called the Joe Moore Award curse. When you get awarded with the nation's best offensive line award, I guess it tends to do worse the game after it's been awarded. But to TCU's credit, their defense, as we've seen, it manhandled Texas. It contained Baylor. It contained Iowa State. It did more than a lot of people gave it credit for. TCU's defense has. Their defense, it isn't consistently elite, but again, shut down Texas on the road. They can run the football despite being an air raid team, and they do have guys on the offensive line. I underestimated TCU to a certain degree. I will say that. I didn't see too many scenarios where they were 13-1, but I repeated over and over again, despite the fact that I thought Michigan was going to dominate this team and blow them out in the second half, you can't overlook them. They're a playoff team for a reason. I don't care if you're facing, like, I do not care if you are facing, like, Wyoming Community College. You do not overlook another team if you are on that team or you on that staff. You are facing a playoff team. You run the Philly special with a tight end. What are you doing? You have Donovan Edwards, you have Kalel Mullings, you have CJ Stokes, you have a consensus All-American at center, you have first-team All-Big Ten offensive linemen. Run it up the middle. And then, when Roman Wilson collects a beautifully thrown ball by J.J. McCarthy, who will get unwarranted criticism, despite the fact that computers say he outplayed Max Duggan, and despite the fact that I think from an eye test perspective, you can agree with that from what the computers say, that J.J. McCarthy was the best quarterback on the field. But then Sharon Moore and Matt Weiss trot out a formation that I have not seen before this year, where Kalel Mullings is lined diagonal to J.J. McCarthy, and J.J. McCarthy does one of the worst things he did all game. It was worse than the first pick six, not as bad as the second one. And he gives it to Mullings, and Mullings, it's also his own fault, doesn't even collect the ball, literally drops it, and it's a touchback. It's a touchback. That right there is 7 points. The Philly special play, by running that instead of kicking it or running it up the middle, in which you would have had a much better chance of, scoring, possibly 3 to 7 points there. Michigan left so many points on the field. And in another reality, those picks, too, the 2 picks being pick sixes, not how fortunate it was for TCU, but in another reality, those could be held to field goals. Or maybe TCU doesn't get any points off of those picks. But that's why you play the game once. This is not a 10-game series, because if this was a 10-game series, Michigan would probably have above a 500 record. They'd probably win 6, 7, 8 of these games, maybe even 9. But TCU won the one that matters, the one that's been played. So I don't want to hear anything about the refs, anything about the targeting call, anything about, let me, the guy who's making this video, discuss the what-if scenarios. Let me discuss that. And I'm only using them when I discuss what-if scenarios. They aren't excusing my team away. What they are is giving you a perspective of how badly the coaching staff messed up. If you have multiple what-if scenarios, and not even like unreasonable ones, but reasonable what-if scenarios, the coaching staff messed up. The game plan here was disgusting. I mean, to somewhat of the coaching staff's credit, it eventually made sense why they ran those weird plays and formations against TCU, because TCU was more physical up front than anyone thought. But 4th and goal, from the 2, do what you did with Corum against Rutgers. From the 1, run it up the middle and see what happens. Just do it. Like, sometimes the simple things sometimes they're the best. And Michigan at times tried to get too complex. And that's playing into TCU's game. TCU's the complex team that runs an air raid that's like not even replicated anywhere else. TCU's the one who came up with complex blitz packages to effectively neuter our passing game and run game. TCU is successful as a complex team. They have to be. They don't have top 30 talent. They're a first-year staff. They have to be complex. They have to out-scheme you to beat you. They have to. You think that if them and Michigan both played their A-plus game, TCU would win? No. And neither with Georgia or Ohio State. They have to be complex. They have to out-scheme you. They have to find ways to engage with you in a shootout, or if they don't think they can engage with you in a shootout, they have to revamp their defense, change formations, which they did on offense, defense. Heck, they even lost their starting running back. They still ran the football very successfully. I mean, listen, Michigan played right into TCU's hands. And TCU did what any elite coaching staff would do. Yes, TCU's coaching staff is elite. I underestimated how elite they were. They took advantage of Michigan's mistakes. And TCU didn't play their A-plus game. I mean, Duggan made some poor picks. He made some poor throws. There were some drops. And some of those touchdowns that, really it was schematics. It was schematics that won TCU the game. Quentin Johnson's 76-yard pass from Max Duggan was not some amazing deep pass by Duggan. It was a mesh concept. They perfectly schemed against our blitz. There was another time where we blitzed corners and they schemed their guy going vertical or on a comeback route, and he was wide open, and our safety conveniently dropped into deep coverage instead of covering that side of the field. TCU out-schemed Michigan. They out-schemed Michigan, and TCU in every area except quarterback played better. Played better than we did. They had the better offensive line, the better D-line, and they had the better... Michigan, you put a blindfold over these two teams' logos, you'd think they were the opposite. The way Michigan played, big plays but not finishing in the red zone, that's textbook TCU if you look at statistics. But the way TCU played, opportunistic with picks, finishing in the red zone, they don't pass well but they run well, isn't that Michigan? These two teams flipped scripts. And that's why TCU won, because they played more sound, fundamental football. They were more efficient with their talent. They out-schemed Michigan. And the cherry on top was the fact that both teams were playing TCU's game, engaging in a shootout where you scored very quickly and where TOP on possessions was irrelevant, and where Michigan tried to get too complex and they overthought themselves. That the Philly special is the perfect example of that. And Michigan was anxious too. Michigan was totally anxious. The false starts, very uncharacteristic. Victor Oluwatimi, who I think, argument for the best center in the nation. That bad snap, 4th and 10, which was, his fault. And players make mistakes. I'm just saying what was the reality. That whole team was anxious. They weren't anxious against Illinois. They weren't anxious against Ohio State. But in this game, they were. They were absolutely anxious in this game. And that is a fact. TCU played the game of their lives, and I am all here for it. And listen, the adjustments that they made were phenomenal. The plays, those mesh concepts, them matching up with our blitzes, they made Michigan gamble. The second half adjustments were a failure. And, Jesse Minter, it honestly looked like Ohio State's defense. Either way too conservative, way too aggressive. And it was crazy. It was absolutely crazy. And TCU, those pick sixes, taking advantage of whatever they could get their hands on, nearly returning that punt for a touchdown, playing good on special teams, playing good on offense, playing good on defense, manhandling Michigan at the line of scrimmage. All these different things. TCU was phenomenal in this game. And they made their mistakes, but whereas Michigan played about their C game, I would say, maybe a little worse, but I'm just going to go safe and say they played their C game. TCU played their A game. Yes, Max Duggan could have made some better decisions. The receivers couldn't have tipped the balls and gave Michigan opportunities with picks. DeMercado, TCU's running back who led the team in rushing yards, couldn't have fumbled. But it is what it is. They made mistakes along with Michigan. The difference is they capitalized. TCU capitalized on Michigan's mistakes. And TCU was more efficient in the red zone and more efficient overall than Michigan was. TCU only kicked 1 field goal. Michigan kicked 3. Michigan failed on 4th down multiple times. And they failed in that red zone with that Philly special. These are things that matter. These might be small things, but they added up over time. And for TCU, it's like clockwork. And the Horned Frogs will move on to the Peach Bowl. They'll move on and play whoever wins between Ohio State and Georgia. And seeing that, I'm a Michigan guy, I hate to say this, but I don't want Georgia anywhere near a national title. I want Ohio State versus TCU. That's what I want for the national championship game. Max Duggan went 14 of 29, 225 yards. He averaged 7.8 yards per pass, 2 touchdowns, 2 picks. He had a 75.5 QBR. Listen, he didn't even complete 50% of his passes, but how he manages the game, he also had 2 rushing touchdowns, how he manages the game, and what he does, and the fact that he has less talent than Caleb Williams, and the fact that he led his team to a playoff win, he deserved the Heisman over Caleb Williams all day. And I've been wrong about some things, including the fact that Michigan would win this game, but I was dead right on the fact that Max Duggan should have won the Heisman. He is one of the best quarterbacks in the nation. I think he might be the best quarterback in the nation. He might even be college football's best player with the way that he carried his team, willed them to compete with Kansas State in that Big 12 championship game. And the fact that there were moments where, Duggan was the reason TCU was so successful on the ground, because Michigan couldn't defend him, so they had to defend Duggan and whoever the running back was, and that opened up TCU, opened them up wide for big plays on the ground. TCU had 263 rushing yards. They averaged 6.4 yards per carry against Michigan with 3 rushing touchdowns. That's some Kenneth Walker type stuff on the ground against Michigan. By comparison, Michigan had 186 rushing yards for 4.7 yards per carry, and they had 3 rushing touchdowns. Michigan's run game was very bipolar. You either had a tackle for loss or they gained about 5 to 7 yards. It was very inconsistent. More of that had to do with the offensive line and blocking schemes or the handoffs by McCarthy than it had to do anything with Donovan Edwards, who had 119 rushing yards. He averaged 5.2 yards per carry. McCarthy also averaged 5.2 yards per carry, and he had 52 rushing yards, 1 rushing touchdown. McCarthy himself, we'll get to him in a few minutes. I think that, statistically speaking, looking at it, he was the better QB, and his team shut down. His team shut down. Michigan's supporting cast was non-existent. It wasn't there. And a lot of that was due to scheming and play calling. I'm not gonna sit here and blame these players. When you look at schematics, you look at matchups, you look at everything that happened, and that coaching staff was responsible. Jim Harbaugh, Jesse Minter, Sharon Moore, Matt Weiss, they were responsible for today, allowing 51 points to TCU. And really it was, they allowed 38, really, because the pick sixes and all these different things. And I apologize if there is any background noise. Family is just, there's tons of people here. It is, somewhat of an inconvenience, but it is what it is. Hope you don't hear too much of it. Anyway, TCU 51, Michigan 45. Michigan outgained the Horned Frogs. They outgained the Horned Frogs in yards, first downs, and TOP. But TCU was 8 of 16 on third down, while Michigan was 3 of 13. Michigan was 0 of 2 on third down. Michigan averaged 2 yards more per pass attempt, but nearly 2 yards less per rush attempt. TCU also had more penalties. So Michigan had less penalties, more TOP, more total yards, but when it came to it, Michigan couldn't do what they like to do and convert on those third and fourth downs, which are absolutely critical to their success. And they failed right there. And that's coaching. That's schematics. Absolutely. So TCU, God bless, good game. I, as a Michigan fan, am livid to a certain degree, but I also, listen, TCU is a new face in the college football playoff. And if I want my Wolverines to look good as they possibly can this year, and for them to keep that number 2 ranking, I have to have TCU to win it all. So go out, win it all. Please do so. Please, please do so. Win it all. Up next, just talking about some final points. The offensive and defensive play calling was extremely questionable in both halves for Michigan. The Philly special, that weird formation where Kalel Mullings was lined up as a fullback, J.J. McCarthy, the pick 6 that he had, it was a pass on 1st and 10, which is uncharacteristic for Michigan to pass on 1st and 10 in the first place. All these different things. It's just crazy. It was extremely crazy. It wasn't even crazy. It was just unfathomable. Like, play calling has been an area of question for the staff all season on offense, but on defense it was morbid. And on offense it was like from the depths of hell. It was that bad. And J.J. McCarthy had his bad moments, like the pick 6. He played it at TCU's hands, and TCU, to their credit, I mean, that corner, I forget who his name is, I can quickly look back to it on the Gamecast. He put himself right in position. Bud Clark immediately put himself in position, like came from a yard or a few yards from behind the Michigan receiver, who I think was Ronnie Bell or Roman Wilson, and just took the ball in his own hands and ran back. TCU, I said they had some guys. They had some guys on their secondary, and those people showed up. And then the linebacker with D. Winters, the 29-yard interception return where McCarthy didn't even look like he saw the linebacker, threw it right to him. He had his bad moments, but he did everything he could to win. McCarthy had nearly 400 total yards. McCarthy averaged 10.1 yards per pass, 2 passing touchdowns, 2 picks. That pass to Roman Wilson, by rule, should have been a touchdown. It should have been. It absolutely should have been, because he gained possession. He gained possession in the end zone. And I'm saying that just to say what I think. But it doesn't matter. I thought that the targeting call that they had, looking at it, that was textbook targeting. But would Michigan have even driven down the field and scored if you just changed that one thing? They still would have had to drive, 60-something yards in a few seconds and put it in the end zone. You see, changing one play, if you have to rely on one play to be changed to win the game, why couldn't you have just closed it out? Why couldn't you have schemed better? Life doesn't always go your way. I'm sure TCU felt cheated when against Kansas State that ball, which was in the end zone on 3rd and goal, was called back, and then they had to run it on 4th and goal, and they fell short. That should have been a touchdown against Kansas State. But even if it was, let's say they called it, who's to say that Kansas State still doesn't win that game somehow? Changing one play and suggesting that that's all the team needed to win, unless it was a miracle on a Hail Mary, which is unlikely as it is asinine. Just want to lay that out there. McCarthy was 20 of 34 for 343 yards, thrown 2 touchdowns and 2 picks. He also had 52 rushing yards for 1 rushing touchdown with a long of 39. He had 1 fumble, but he didn't lose it. Kalel Mullings was the only one who had a fumble, and it was lost. Mozzie Smith also recovered a fumble. One of, the huge differences was the defense. Michigan's defense was worse than TCU's and had a terrible outing. I mean, you look at both teams And Michigan had I'd say Michigan had outside of the red zone, Michigan had the superior offense. They certainly had the superior offensive talent. They were the ones getting the big plays through the air, and they even got a big play on the ground with Donovan Edwards relatively early. They were the ones getting the big explosive plays. TCU was the one who was tougher, sounder, more patient, more fundamental. TCU had 13 tackles for loss, 4 sacks. Michigan had 1 sack, 3 tackles for loss. The TCU also had 2 QB hurries, 6 passes defended. Michigan just had 4 passes defended. TCU had 10 more solo tackles despite having 2 less total tackles. Goes to show that TCU, their defense, was superior at tackling. And Michigan, it missed assignments, missed coverages, poor tackling, you name it. And for TCU, Sonny Dykes prepared the perfect game plan and the Horned Frogs executed. Him and Garrett Riley. That offense hummed. And you cannot forget that defense because, again, 13 tackles for loss against the number 1 O-line in the nation. That defensive performance, not the secondary or overall, but that performance on the D-line for the amount of talent they have might have been more impressive than what last year's Georgia D-line did to us. TCU doesn't have nearly the talent that Georgia does, and they still got 13 tackles for loss, 4 sacks. They pressured McCarthy out of his mind. And credit Joe Gillespie, the defensive coordinator, for that game plan against Michigan. Give him all the credit in the world. TCU was the better rushing team, and they dominated at the line of scrimmage, as shown by the amount of sacks that they had, the tackles for loss, the fact that Duggan was pretty much well protected. When Duggan had problems, it wasn't because of pressure, it was because of coverage. Michigan did, I'd actually say, with the exception of, the mesh concepts, which that, is more on the fact that Michigan was just blitzing a ton of people and you don't have a lot of people in coverage. When Michigan had people in coverage, they did pretty well. There weren't one-on-one opportunities that Michigan lost. There weren't any heaved balls that were 50-50 that Michigan just lost control of. When there were 50-50 balls, Michigan owned it. The problem was running the football. The problem was TCU scheming wide open guys successfully and the line of scrimmage on defense and offense. So TCU, you're opportunistic. You take advantage of mistakes. You've played your A game. You've won a playoff game in your first year. These are things to be proud of. Congratulations. And as it stands with how the defenses of Ohio State and Georgia look and how their offenses are vulnerable, you can win it all. You can. I mean, myself and the world already doubted you and you proved us wrong. Who's to say you can't win it all? If you can do this again. And TCU, Horned Frog fans, or just people who, just talking about TCU in general, they played a near perfect game. So to replicate a similar performance will be extremely challenging. But seeing how TCU's won close games all year, how they've always been an underdog, they'll be in familiar territory. And I have absolute confidence that TCU can win it all. Will they? It depends on matchups. It depends on how Ohio State and Georgia finish out in the second half. But it is what it is. They're opportunistic, and they're efficient, ridiculously efficient. Michigan, I firmly believe, and I would like to believe, that if these teams matched up again, Michigan would win. And that in a 10-game series, Michigan would probably win 70 or 80% of the time. But there's only one game. It's just like against Ohio State. The computers and I disagree on this, but the computers think that in a 10-game series, Ohio State would be the victor against Michigan. But that one game in Columbus is what mattered, and Michigan won that. It's the same darn story here. The one game that mattered, TCU executed better. They were mentally tougher. They did not flinch. They played more fundamental football. They did everything better, except for, again, quarterback play. And that's even debatable. There's an argument that Max Duggan had the better game. There just is. From the way that J.J. McCarthy had some bad handoffs to the fact that just to a lot of things. Mainly the handoffs, mainly the game management, and the fact that McCarthy's worst throws were worse than Duggan's worst throws. But Sonny Dykes is Coach of the Year for a reason. Michigan, I'm going to finish out the video by saying that very early, I think Michigan will win the national title or reach the national title next year. They return so much, and I do firmly believe, knowing how this team is adaptable and they learn their lessons, Michigan was one touchdown and an extra point away from winning it all this year. And I think with what they have returning next year, it'll be very hard. It'll be even harder to stop next year's team compared to this year's Michigan team. But with a road trip against a Penn State team that returns a lot, hosting an Ohio State team that'll obviously be out for blood, and multiple other things, who knows? I'll have to wait until next year to find out. Thank you all for watching. If you're new to this channel, please hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, click the notification bell, and comment your thoughts on this video down below. Thank you all for watching, and if you're listening via Spotify, please follow the channel and check out my merchandise store, linked down below. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you around. Bye-bye.